Welcome to Noir Street.
Like, subscribe, and stay with the mystery. Tell me, which part of the world are you watching from?
Chapter 1. The butler who saw too clearly at 11 minutes past 10 on a rainy Thursday morning. Nero Wolfe was examining a plate of scrambled eggs as if it had committed an offense against civilization. They are too moist, he told Fritz Brenner. They were cooked exactly as you requested, Fritz replied. Then my request was misunderstood. I was at my desk opening the mail and deciding which envelopes contained money, which might contain money, and which deserved the wastebasket. Outside, rain pressed against the windows of the brownstone on West 35th Street, and the traffic sounded like an argument nobody intended to settle. The telephone rang. Nero Wolfe's office. Archie Goodwin speaking. A tense male voice said, "My name is James Ashford. I need Mr. Wolfe immediately. My uncle has been murdered. That usually creates urgency. Where are you?" "Ravenwood Manor, near Bedford. Are the police there?" "Of course. Inspector Kramer arrived this morning." At the mention of Kramer, Wolfe lowered his fork. "I asked who was murdered." "Charles Ashford. The name belonged to steel mills, shipping companies, real estate holdings, and enough money to make newspapers respectful." "How?" "He was shot in his locked study last night. Our butler claims he saw the killer through the study window." "That sounds useful." "It is impossible. The man he claims he saw was in another room with 7 witnesses. Who was the man?" "My father." I looked at Wolfe. He shut his eyes, which meant he was listening. I said, "Mr. Wolfe requires a $5,000 retainer." "Agreed." "Cash or certified check?" "Agreed." "We'll be there before noon." After I hung up, Wolfe opened his eyes. "You will be there," he said. "I will not. You are the brain. I am the transportation. You are also presumptuous, but profitable," he grunted, pushed away the eggs, and instructed me to obtain the butler's exact statement, the dimensions of the courtyard, the position of the study windows, the condition of every lock, and the movements of everyone in the house. By 11:30, I was driving through the iron gates of Ravenwood Manor. The house stood on a wooded rise, grey and heavy beneath the rain. It had towers, stone arches, narrow chimneys, and enough windows to make a burglar feel ambitious. A broad courtyard separated the main house from a lower west wing. Inspector Kramer met me in the entrance hall with an unlit cigar between his teeth. "Where is Wolfe?" he demanded. "Home protecting his health. So he sent you." "He trusts me." "That proves he's getting careless." He led me into the study. It was a long room lined with dark shelves. A desk stood near 2 tall windows overlooking the courtyard. Charles Ashford's body had been removed, but a dark stain remained on the carpet beside an overturned chair. "The shot was heard at 9:27, Kramer said. "The study door was locked. The key was lying beside the body. Both windows were fastened from inside. Weapon?" "His own revolver. Found near his hand. Suicide?" "Bullet entered from behind the left ear. Unless he was unusually flexible, no." "Who found him?" "The butler, Edgar Miles. He says he was crossing the courtyard with a tray when he heard the shot. He looked through the window and saw Stephen Ashford standing over the body with the revolver. Stephen being the victim's brother. And James Ashford's father. Where does Stephen say he was?" "In the drawing room playing cards. 7 people support him." I went to the left window. The courtyard was roughly 60 feet across. Near its center stood a dry stone fountain. From the position Kramer indicated, a person could see the study windows. But rain, uneven glass, and reflections made details uncertain even in daylight. "Last night was clear," Kramer said. "The study lights were on. Could Miles have recognized a face?" "We tested it. Movement, perhaps. Clothing, maybe. A face doubtful." A pale young man entered. He introduced himself as James Ashford. He looked as though he had not slept. "My father did not kill Uncle Charles," he said. "What did they quarrel about?" James hesitated. Kramer answered for him. "Charles accused Stephen of falsifying company records. Said he would expose him at a board meeting today." James protested. "My father denied it." "Did he threaten Charles?" "He said Charles would regret humiliating him." "Not a loving farewell," I said. James led us through the dining room to the butler's pantry. Edgar Miles stood at a table polishing silver. He was tall, thin and slightly stooped, with white hair and a calm-lined face. Steel-rimmed spectacles rested low on his nose. He had served the Ashford family for 41 years and looked capable of remembering every plate broken during that period. "Mr. Miles," I said, "tell me exactly what happened." He folded the polishing cloth. "At approximately 9:27, I was carrying coffee spoons from the dining room to this pantry. The inner passage was blocked because a wine bottle had broken there, so I crossed the courtyard. When I reached the fountain, I heard a shot. I looked toward Mr. Ashford's study. The curtains were open. I saw Mr. Stephen Ashford beside the desk with a revolver in his right hand. Mr. Charles Ashford was falling. Mr. Stephen then closed the curtains." "You saw his face?" "Yes, from 60 feet away." "The room was brightly illuminated. You are certain it was Stephen Ashford?" "I am. What happened next?" "I dropped the tray, ran inside and called for assistance. The study door was locked. Mr. James Ashford and Mr. Richard Vale forced it open. You wear those spectacles for distance?" "For ordinary sight. Were you wearing that pair last night?" "Yes." The answer came after the smallest pause. "Do you own another pair?" "I keep a spare. May I see them?" He opened the upper drawer of a small desk and handed me a brown leather case. Inside was another pair of steel-rimmed spectacles, nearly identical to the ones he wore. "Same prescription?" I asked, "so I understand. When were they made?" "Last spring. Do you use them often?" "Occasionally. When did you last wear them?" "I do not recall." "Yesterday?" "No." That answer came too quickly. The spare spectacles were spotless. A bottle of lens cleaner and a folded cloth stood beside the drawer. "You cleaned them this morning?" "I maintain my belongings, Mr. Goodwin." "Even belongings you do not remember using?" His expression hardened slightly. "Disorder does not become acceptable because a man has died. I returned the spectacles to the case. Who broke the wine bottle?" "Miss Lucy Ashford." "What time?" "Shortly after 9. Who cleaned it?" "A maid named Sarah Kent." Kramer removed the cigar from his mouth. "Sarah is missing," he said. "She left after midnight." "Coat and suitcase gone. That was the first fact with real movement." "In it we went outside to the courtyard." Miles walked to the north side of the fountain. "I stood here," he said. "I faced the study window. From that position, the desk was visible, but only partly. A man standing beside it would have been framed by old glass, reflections, curtain edges, and the stone figure of the fountain." "You identified Stephen Ashford from here?" I asked. "Yes, clearly." "Yes." He adjusted his spectacles. I moved a few steps in both directions. The view improved slightly from the right, but not enough to explain the precision of his statement. As we returned indoors, shouting came from the drawing room. A broad, grey-haired man emerged. Stephen Ashford had the face and manner of someone accustomed to winning arguments by remaining louder than everyone else. Behind him stood his wife, Helen Ashford, a composed woman in her late 50s and the mother of James and Lucy. "You cannot accept the word of a half-blind servant," he told Kramer. "I was with my family." "You also threatened the victim," Kramer replied. "I threatened legal action." "With a revolver?" "The revolver belonged to Charles. My fingerprints are on it because he showed it to me last week." Stephen turned toward Miles. "Tell them what Charles promised you." The butler's face changed. Kramer said, "What promise?" Stephen gave a bitter laugh. "Charles intended to leave Miles $50,000 in a new will." James stared at him. Kramer looked at the butler. "Is that true?" "Yes. You did not mention—" "I was not asked about Mr. Ashford's will. You were asked whether you had any reason to—" "Lie? I did not lie." Stephen stepped closer. "You saw what you wanted to. See?" Miles met his eyes. "Through the steel-rimmed lenses." "No, sir. I saw you." The hall went silent. I looked back toward the pantry. 2 pairs of spectacles. Nearly identical. One supposedly unused but freshly polished. An elderly witness who had recognized a face across 60 feet of moonlit courtyard through old glass. A missing maid. A broken bottle that forced the witness outside. A locked study. A new will. "I found a telephone in the morning room and called Wolfe. He answered after 4 rings. Yes?" I gave him the facts, including Miles's statement word for word. When I finished, Wolfe asked, "Were the spare spectacles dusty?" "No, spotless. The case?" "Clean." "Did he hesitate before admitting he owned them?" "Barely." And before denying he wore them yesterday? No hesitation. The answer was too fast. There was a pause. Archie, the butler, did not see too little. He saw too much, precisely. Meaning, if he stood where he claims, the second pair of spectacles should be irrelevant. Therefore they are not. You think they have different lenses? I think assumptions are the refuge of the lazy. Find the optician who prepared them, and Sarah Kent? After the optician. Kramer may disagree. Mr. Kramer's discomfort is not evidence. I looked through the window toward the grey courtyard and the study beyond it. Anything else? Do not allow either pair of spectacles to leave the house. You expect someone to steal them? I expect someone already knows why they matter. He hung up. I remained beside the telephone, watching rain strike the courtyard stones. Somewhere in the house, Stephen Ashford began shouting again. In the pantry, silver touched silver with a faint, careful sound. Edgar Miles had seen a murder that should have been impossible to see. According to Wolfe, the answer was waiting inside a second pair of spectacles that everyone else considered useless. Chapter 2. The pair no one needed. I found the name of Edgar Miles's optician in the most direct way available. I asked Edgar. That sounds simple, but simple questions in a murder house often arrive wearing armor. He was still in the butler's pantry, polishing a silver coffee pot that already reflected my face better than most mirrors. Inspector Kramer had gone upstairs to question Sarah Kent's roommate, and James Ashford had disappeared in search of the certified check that would make Wolfe officially interested. I leaned against the pantry door. Who made your spectacles? Miles did not look up. Mr. Walter Finch. Address? Finch Optical Company, Madison Avenue. The same man made both pairs? Yes. How long has he handled your eyes? Approximately 12 years. Good, I like old professional relationships. They usually come with records. He stopped polishing. Why are you interested in my spectacles? Because Mr. Wolfe is. That is not an answer. It is around our office. His eyes lifted to mine through the steel rims. The police have the weapon. The locked room and the quarrel between Mr. Charles and Mr. Stephen, yet Mr. Wolfe concerns himself with an old man's spectacles. He often begins with things everybody else has agreed not to notice, both. Pairs are alike, so everyone tells me they were made from the same prescription. So you told me his fingers tightened on the cloth. I said, you won't mind if Mr. Finch confirms it. No, it was a clean answer, but he had taken too long to give it. I crossed to the small desk and glanced at the upper drawer. It was closed. The brown leather case holding the spare spectacles was inside, unless someone had been quicker than Wolfe expected. Keep that drawer locked. I said, there is no lock. Then keep yourself between it and the rest of the family. I am employed to protect the Ashford silver, not my spectacles. Today the spectacles may be worth more. He looked at me as if deciding whether I was making fun of him. I was not, which probably made it worse. Before leaving the pantry, I asked to see the pair again. Miles opened the drawer and handed me the brown case. The spectacles were where I had left them. I examined the rims, bridge, and arms. The right arm had a tiny stamped number near the hinge. I wrote it down. The pair on Miles's face had a number too, though persuading him to remove them required a look that could have chilled soup. The numbers were not consecutive. That proved nothing, except that they had not been manufactured together. But nothing is a respectable beginning. I returned his spectacles. Which case belongs to the pair you're wearing? He pointed to a narrow shelf above the desk. A black leather case rested there. I took it down. The black case was older than the brown one. Its edges were rubbed pale and the clasp had been repaired with a thin strip of brass. Separate cases, I said. Naturally. Why naturally? Because they are separate pairs. Some people put one pair in whichever case is nearest. I am not some people. That I believed. A young maid entered carrying a stack of folded napkins. She was plump, red-haired, and nervous enough to drop the top napkin when she saw me. Miles introduced her as Mary Dale. I picked up the napkin and handed it to her. Do you know which spectacles Mr. Miles normally wears? She looked at him before answering. The ones he has on, sir. And the spare pair. In the brown case. Does he ever use them? She hesitated. Miles said, answer the question, Mary. I have never seen him wear them. Never. No, sir. How long have you worked here? 3 years. Then why keep them polished? Her eyes went again to Miles. He keeps everything polished. That was true enough to be useless. I spent the next half hour asking the same question in different rooms. The cook. Mrs. Walsh had been at Ravenwood Manor for 16 years. She said the spare pair had existed as long as she could remember and had probably never left the drawer. The upstairs maid. Nora Pike said Edgar wore only one pair and became annoyed if anyone touched either case. The gardener. Henry Bell said all spectacles looked alike to him and suggested I ask about pruning shears if I wanted intelligent answers. Mrs. Beatrice Bell. The house manager was more definite. They are identical, she told me. We were in the morning room, where the curtains had been opened, and the rain had turned the courtyard into a grey square. How do you know? Edgar told me. Have you tried them? Certainly not. Compared them? No. Seen him wearing the spare pair? Not in years. How many years? She frowned. She was a square woman in her 50s, dressed in dark wool and sensible shoes. Perhaps 5. Perhaps more. Yet the pair was made last spring. Her expression changed. I understood the old spare pair was repaired. Who said repaired? Edgar? Did he say the lenses were replaced? No. What happened to the previous pair? I do not know. Broken. So I assumed. You people do a lot of assuming. This household has more important concerns than Mr. Miles's spectacles. Not according to Nero Wolfe. She pressed her lips together. Mr. Wolfe is not here. That saves the furniture. He dislikes traveling. I asked whether anyone in the house had known Edgar visited an optician recently. She said no. I asked whether Edgar had trouble reading menus, recognizing visitors, or identifying objects at a distance. She said his sight was weak but steady. Could he recognize a man through the study window from the courtyard? She looked toward the rain. I would have said no. Yet Edgar does not lie. Everyone lies. Edgar does not. That makes him unique enough to be dangerous. She did not like that. But I had not come to be liked. At 12:20, James Ashford found me and handed over a certified check for $5,000. That improved the climate. I telephoned Wolfe, told him the fee had materialized, and gave him the number stamped on each pair of spectacles. Good, he said. Everyone says the spare pair has been untouched for years. Everyone? The servants. None has seen him wear it recently. Yet it was manufactured last spring, possibly repaired. Possibly is a word for men unwilling to work. Go to the optician. I'm on my way. How to take both pairs, Miles may object. Then take Inspector Kramer. That was Wolfe's way of making another man responsible. For the unpleasant part, Kramer was in the library questioning Lucy Ashford, the woman who had broken the wine bottle. She was 26, dark-haired and angry. I waited until Kramer had finished asking why she had left the drawing room at 9:22 to answer a telephone call no one could confirm. When he came out, I told him I needed the spectacles. For what? To compare the prescriptions. Wolfe's idea? No, the gardener's. He chewed his cigar. What do spectacles have to do with a bullet? That's what we're finding out. The butler says they're identical. Then the trip will be short. Kramer stared at me for 3 seconds, then marched toward the pantry. Miles did not enjoy surrendering either pair, but Kramer had a badge, a temper, and no interest in household dignity. We put the spectacles in separate evidence envelopes, marked them, and left Miles wearing an expression that could have sharpened knives. Finch Optical Company occupied a narrow shop between a jeweler and a store that sold neckties no honest man would buy. Walter Finch was 60 or so, small, tidy, and almost entirely bald. He wore rimless spectacles that enlarged his eyes and made him look permanently startled. I showed him my card. Archie Goodwin, representing Nero Wolfe. I know the name. Today, everybody does. Do you know Edgar Miles? Certainly. Kramer placed the 2 envelopes on the counter. Finch looked at them and then at us. Has something happened? Charles Ashford was murdered, Kramer said. Finch swallowed. I read the morning paper. These belong to Miles, I said. We need to know whether the prescriptions are identical. He opened the envelopes carefully and carried the spectacles to a measuring instrument at the rear of the shop. Kramer and I followed. Finch tested the black case pair first. He wrote figures on a pad. Then he tested the brown case pair. His eyebrows rose. They are not identical. Kramer's cigar stopped moving. How different? I asked. Entirely different in purpose. He lifted the pair Miles normally wore. These lenses are for close and middle distance, reading, serving at table, household work. Mr. Miles is farsighted and has some astigmatism. He picked up the spare pair. These are distance lenses. Stronger correction. Adjusted to sharpen vision across a room or farther. How much farther? Kramer asked. That depends on light, contrast, and the individual eye. But certainly they would improve recognition at 60 feet. Kramer looked at me. I said, when were the distance lenses made? Finch went to a filing cabinet and removed a folder. The frames are older, but the lenses were replaced 4 months ago. Ordered by Miles? Yes. In person? Yes. What did he say he needed them for? Finch examined the record. He said he was having difficulty seeing across the grounds at night. There it was. Kramer took the cigar from his mouth. At night? Yes. Did he mention Ravenwood Manor? He said his duties occasionally required him to identify vehicles and visitors approaching from the outer drive. Did you make the everyday pair too? I asked. 2 years ago. Those lenses have not been changed since, so the spare pair is newer. The lenses are expensive? The lenses are expensive. Moderately. The night coating and custom adjustment increased the cost. How much? Finch named a figure that would not disturb Charles Ashford, but was considerable for a butler. Who paid? I asked. Cash. Did Miles seem secretive? Finch considered it. He asked that no reminder notice be mailed to the manor. He said household correspondence was sometimes misplaced. Kramer made a sound in his throat. I asked Finch whether the two pairs could be mistaken for each other. Easily, unless worn. The frames are nearly the same. Could Miles see clearly at close range with the distance pair? Not comfortably. Reading would be difficult. Could he cross a courtyard wearing them? Certainly, though nearby objects might blur. Could he identify a man through a lit window 60 feet away? Finch looked uneasy. Under favorable conditions, yes, Kramer began pacing between the counter and the front window, so Miles lied. He lied about the prescriptions, I said. He also lied about which pair he wore. Probably. Probably. We know the spare pair could explain the view. We don't yet know why he denied using them. Kramer turned on Finch. Did Miles collect these himself? Yes. Anyone with him? No. Did he return afterward? Finch looked at the file again. Once, about 6 weeks ago. He said the right lens seemed loose. Was it? Very slightly. I tightened the rim. Anything else? No. I asked to see the original order. Finch showed it to us. Edgar Miles had signed it in a neat, old-fashioned hand. Beneath the prescription was the note. Distance use, low light. Outdoor observation. I copied the words. Kramer said, I'm taking the spectacles. They are already police property for the afternoon, I reminded him. They're evidence now. They were evidence before. You just didn't know what kind. He told me what he thought of that. I telephoned Wolfe from Finch's office. He answered promptly. Well, the pairs are not identical. The black case pair is for reading and middle distance. The brown case pair was fitted 4 months ago with strong distance lenses and low-light coating. Miles paid cash and asked that no notice be mailed to Ravenwood. Silence, I continued. The optician says those lenses could allow him to recognize a man at 60 feet through a lighted window. Could? Under favorable conditions. Did Mr. Miles state a purpose when he ordered them? He said he needed to identify vehicles and visitors across the grounds at night. That sound from Wolfe could mean satisfaction, irritation, or the birth of a theory, I said. Kramer thinks Miles lied about wearing them during the murder. Of course he wore them, you sound certain. Archie, a man does not secretly purchase specialized spectacles, maintain them carefully, and deny recent use unless their use reveals something he wishes hidden, such as seeing Stephen Ashford clearly. No, that stopped me. What else? The spectacles explain how he saw clearly. They do not explain why he lied about seeing clearly. I considered it. You think the problem is not what he saw, but where he saw it from. I think nothing yet. I observe that the lie is larger than the lenses. Kramer wants to confront him. Discourage it. Have you met Kramer? Yes, that is why I said discourage, not prevent. What should I do? Return to Ravenwood. Determine whether Mr. Miles's duties ever required him to watch the drive at night. Also determine who knew he owned distance spectacles. The servants all insist the two pairs were identical. Then either Mr. Miles deceived them, or one of them is deceiving you. And the missing maid. Find her room. I hung up. Kramer was waiting. Well, Wolfe says not to confront Miles yet. Then Wolfe can come here and stop me. He also says the spectacles are only part of the lie. Kramer's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means Edgar Miles did not order expensive distance lenses for decoration. He wanted to see something far away, especially at night. Last night he saw something, but he is hiding more than the fact that he used the right glasses. Kramer put the cigar back in his mouth. I'm going to ask him. You'll get another polished statement. I've cracked polished statements before, not by shouting, sometimes. Shouting saves time. We drove back to Ravenwood in separate cars. The rain had stopped by the time we reached the manor, but the clouds still hung low over the trees. The courtyard stones shone darkly, and the study windows reflected the pale afternoon sky. Miles was not in the pantry. Mrs. Bell said he had gone to his room to change his collar. I checked the desk drawer. The brown leather case was gone. Naturally, since Kramer still had the spectacles. The black case remained on the shelf. On the table beside the lens cleaner lay a folded cloth. I picked it up. A faint line of grey dust marked one corner, not household dust, but something darker and finer. Brick or stone, perhaps. Behind me, Mary Dale said, "Mr. Goodwin." She had entered without my hearing her. Something wrong? She looked toward the corridor before answering. Mr. Miles did wear the spare spectacles. When? Sometimes at night. How often? I don't know. I saw him once in the West Gallery. What West Gallery? Her face changed as soon as the words were out. I should not have said that. You already did. There is an old passage above the library. It has been closed for years. Then what was Miles doing there? I don't know. Wearing the distant spectacles? She nodded. When? 3 weeks ago. What was he looking at? She twisted her hands together. The study windows, I kept my voice level. From inside the house. Yes. Could he see the desk? I think so. Who else knows about the gallery? I don't know. Does Kramer? No. Good. For the next 5 minutes. Let's keep it that way. That was not entirely loyal to law enforcement, but Wolfe paid better. I went to the pantry window and looked across the courtyard toward Charles Ashford's study. The forgotten spectacles had already explained how Edgar Miles could see farther than anyone expected. Now Mary Dale had supplied a more dangerous question. Perhaps the butler had not been standing in the courtyard at all. Chapter 3, The Impossible View. At 9 o'clock that evening, I stood in the courtyard of Ravenwood Manor, wearing Edgar Miles's distant spectacles, and wishing Nero Wolfe had chosen a profession that required less rain. The weather had cleared, but the stones were still wet, and a thin wind moved across the open square. The moon showed itself between clouds with no enthusiasm. Behind me, Inspector Kramer waited near the dining room door with a stopwatch. 2 county detectives, and the expression of a man prepared to arrest the weather if it interfered. Edgar Miles stood beneath the covered passage. He had been told we were repeating his movements exactly. He had not objected, but his dignity had become so stiff that it appeared to require its own collar. Inside the study, James Ashford had agreed to stand beside the desk. Richard Vale, Charles Ashford's business partner, would sit in the dead man's chair and fall when Kramer gave the signal. Lucy Ashford would close the curtains. It was not Broadway, but the cast had money. I adjusted the spectacles. They sharpened the far wall and made the paving stones near my feet slightly uncertain. Kramer checked his watch. At 9:26, "You leave the dining room carrying the tray," he told Miles. "You reach the fountain at 9:27. A blank cartridge is fired inside the study. Goodwin watches from your position." Miles said, "I have already described what occurred, and now we're describing it back. I do not understand the necessity." "That makes 2 of us," Kramer said. "Move." Miles entered the dining room. I took my place near the fountain, where he claimed to have stood when Charles Ashford was shot. The study windows faced me across 60 feet of dark courtyard. Wall lamps glowed inside the room, and the desk lamp made a yellow pool over the papers. The curtains had been pulled wide, exactly as Miles said they had been. Through the distant spectacles, the window frames looked sharp. So did the brass curtain rod and the edge of the desk. The people did not. James appeared near the desk as a dark figure in evening clothes. Richard Vale sat in the chair, his face turned partly away. I could see heads, shoulders, arms, and changes of position, but the old glass bent light in small waves. Reflections of the moon and the pale stone walls floated across the panes. Kramer's whistle sounded. Miles came through the dining room door, carrying a silver tray. He crossed the courtyard with steady steps. When he reached the fountain, a shot cracked from the study. Vale fell sideways. James raised his right hand. Lucy pulled the curtains together. The whole performance took perhaps 4 seconds. Kramer called, "Well?" "I saw a man fall and another man raise his arm." "Face?" "No. Gun?" "Something dark in his hand. It could have been a revolver, a candle, or a large spoon." James and the others came out of the study and joined us. Kramer turned to Miles. "You identified Stephen Ashford from this spot?" "Yes." "Goodwin couldn't. Mr. Goodwin does not have my eyes. I had your spectacles." "You did not have my familiarity with Mr. Stephen." That was a fair answer. And he knew it. I said, "Let's change positions." We repeated the scene with James standing where Stephen supposedly stood. Then Richard Vale took the position. Then one of the county detectives put on Stephen's dinner jacket. From the fountain, all three looked much the same. Build could be estimated. Clothing could be described. A man might recognize a familiar posture if he wanted badly enough. But Miles had said he saw Stephen's face. The revolver in his right hand, Charles falling in profile, and Stephen drawing the curtains. The glass and distance made that impossible. I walked 10 feet to the right. The angle improved, but the fountain's stone figure blocked part of the desk. I moved left. The reflections became worse. Then I returned to the pantry and looked through its window. From there, the study could be seen at an angle, but the curtains hid most of the room. Kramer followed me. "You agree he lied?" he asked. "He lied about something. You enjoy trimming words. I enjoy leaving room for facts." Miles remained in the courtyard, standing alone beneath the moonlight. He looked less like a servant than a witness carved into the landscape. James came beside us. My father was in the drawing room. Edgar could not have seen him in the study because he was not there. "Your family's alibi still needs work," Kramer said. James's jaw tightened. 7 people place him there. 7 people in one family can repeat one mistake. Or one lie, I added. He looked at me. "You believe my father killed Charles?" "I believe somebody did." That did not satisfy him, but it was all he got. At 9:40, I telephoned Wolfe from the morning room. He was in the office. I could hear the faint clink of a bottle cap, which probably meant beer. Wolfe drank beer with the solemnity other men reserve for legal oaths. I gave him the results. With Miles's distant spectacles, I said, I could see movement and clothing, but no faces. The window glass distorts the view. Reflections make it worse. I could not identify James Vale or a detective wearing Stephen's jacket. "Did you repeat the sequence?" 4 times. "Was the study illuminated as it was last night?" According to Miles, yes. "The curtains?" "Same position." "The moon?" "Close enough." "Foy, close enough is not exact. I'll ask it to return tomorrow." He ignored that. What details in Mr. Miles's statement could not have been observed from the courtyard? Charles falling in profile. Stephen holding the revolver in his right hand. Stephen closing the curtains himself. Also the exact position beside the desk. Could he see the hand clearly? No. Could he see the victim's profile? Not a chance. Then he was nearer. "That's my vote. Your vote is unnecessary. The conclusion is compelled." I sat on the edge of a table, Mary. Dale says she once saw Miles in an Old West gallery, wearing the distant spectacles, hand looking toward the study windows. Silence. Came over the line. Then Wolfe said, "You withheld that. For dramatic order. You are not a dramatist. Tell that to my expense accounts. Describe the gallery. I haven't found it yet. Mary says it runs above or behind the library and has been closed for years. Closed doors are often open to servants, especially old servants." "Indeed. Find its entrance. What about Kramer?" "Do not conceal evidence from him." That sounds almost honest. I did not say when to reveal it. That sounded more like Wolfe. I asked, "You think Miles watched the murder from the gallery?" "I think his statement contains information unavailable from the courtyard. Therefore he obtained it elsewhere. He could have entered the study after the shooting. The door was locked. He could have been the killer. Possible but inelegant. His lie appears designed to preserve his value as a witness while concealing his true position. Why conceal the gallery? That is the next question. When I returned to the hall, Kramer was questioning Miles again. "You said you saw the revolver in Stephen's right hand," Kramer said. "How?" "I saw it. You could not have. Miles's face remained calm. You asked for my statement. I gave it. You gave me a miracle. I cannot improve what happened merely because it troubles you. Kramer's cigar shifted between his teeth. I stepped in before he exploded. Inspector, I need the original house plans, he turned. Why? To check sight lines. We already checked the courtyard. There may be another one. Miles looked at me. It was only a glance, but the calm in his face cracked for an instant. Kramer saw it too. What other sight line? He demanded. I looked at Miles. The West Gallery. The butler's hands tightened behind his back. James said, There is no West Gallery. Mary Dale, standing near the staircase, went pale. Kramer moved toward Miles. You know about it? Miles said nothing. That means yes, Kramer said. Mrs. Bell entered from the dining room. The gallery was sealed before the war. Which war? I asked. The last one. In this house? That may require a date. She ignored me. Kramer said, Show me the entrance. I do not know where it is. Miles spoke at last. I do. Everyone turned toward him. He removed his ordinary spectacles and polished them slowly with a white cloth. The entrance is behind the third bookcase in the library, Kramer said. And when were you last inside? Miles put the spectacles back on. Many years ago. It was another polished answer, smooth enough to admire and false enough to smell. We went to the library. The third bookcase stood against the north wall and held bound histories nobody had opened recently. One of the detectives found a small brass catch hidden beneath a lower shelf. The bookcase swung outward 6 inches. Behind it was a narrow door. Kramer pulled it open. Cold air came from a dark passage beyond. A flight of wooden steps climbed inside the wall. Dust lay on the first step, but not evenly. Near the center was a clean mark shaped like the front edge of a shoe. Kramer looked at Miles. Many years? Miles did not answer. I took a flashlight and climbed. The stairs ended in a narrow gallery running above the library. At the far end, the passage bent toward the study wall. I followed it until I reached a small wooden screen carved into the paneling. Through its openings, I could see the study desk clearly. Not through glass, not across 60 feet. From less than 15, a man standing there could see Charles Ashford's face, the hand holding the revolver. And every movement beside the desk. On the dusty ledge beneath the screen was a fresh, circular mark. I knew what had made it. The end of a spectacle case. When I returned below, Kramer was waiting. Well? I looked at Edgar Miles. He saw the murder, I said. That part was true. Kramer's eyes narrowed, but he didn't see it from the courtyard. Miles stood very still. The impossible view was impossible only because the witness had lied about where his eyes had been. Chapter 4. The Hidden Corridor. The hidden door behind the library bookcase produced 3 immediate reactions. Inspector Kramer wanted it photographed. Measured, dusted, and blamed on someone. James. Ashford wanted to know why his family had never been told it existed. Edgar Miles wanted to say nothing. Preferred Edgar's reaction because silence usually means a man has reached the part of the truth he cannot polish. Kramer stationed a county detective at the library entrance and ordered everyone else out. Then he turned to Miles. You said you had not used this passage in years. That is correct. There is a fresh shoe mark on the stairs. I cannot explain. And there are fresh scratches on the door. I cannot explain those either. You are having a poor afternoon for explanations. Miles stood beside the fireplace with his hands folded behind him. Without the silver tray and pantry walls, he looked older. Not weaker exactly, but less protected by routine. Kramer pointed toward the open bookcase. When did you first learn of the passage? As a young footman. How long ago? 40 years. Who showed it to you? The former butler, Mr. Henry Cole. Why? It was once used by servants during formal gatherings. Trays could be carried from the west stairs to the library and study without crossing the main hall and the gallery. It allowed senior servants to observe whether guests required assistance. Kramer gave him a look. You expect me to believe servants stood inside walls watching rich people drink? In this house, sir, servants were expected to know what was required before being summoned. That still happens, I said. Only now they call it management. Kramer ignored me. When was the corridor sealed? During alterations after the old west staircase was removed. Year? 1938. Yet the door still opens. I believed it had been secured from the other side. You believed wrong. Miles said nothing. I entered the passage again with a flashlight, followed by Kramer and James. The wooden stairs rose between stone walls barely wide enough for my shoulders. Dust covered most of the steps, but two recent tracks disturbed it. One led upward. The other returned. At the top, the corridor turned left and ran behind the library wall. The ceiling was low enough to make Kramer duck, which improved his mood exactly as much as you would expect. The narrow gallery ended at the carved wooden screen overlooking the study. From there, the desk, fireplace, and left side of the room were plainly visible. The view was so clear that I could read the title of a book. Lying open on Charles Ashford's desk, James stared through the openings like anyone standing here could have watched my uncle without being seen. Anyone who knew the passage existed, Kramer said. He ran a finger along the ledge beneath the screen. Just came away except near the fresh circular mark I had noticed earlier. A spectacle case? He asked. Likely. Edgar's? Likely. You're getting generous with that word. I save certainty for Wolfe. A faint line of grey dust crossed the floorboards near the wall. It matched the mark on the cloth I had found in the pantry. I followed it to the far end of the gallery, where the passage appeared to stop at a panel of dark wood. James said, "That is the study wall." I examined the edges. The panel was narrower than the surrounding boards. Near the floor, two fresh scratches exposed pale wood beneath the old stain. Someone opened this recently. Cly said. Kramer crouched beside me. There's no handle. Handles are for doors people admit having. I pressed along the frame and found nothing. James tried the center panel. It did not move. Kramer called down for a screwdriver. One of the detectives brought a small kit. After 10 minutes of probing, swearing, and damaging nothing important, we found a recessed metal catch concealed behind a strip of molding. The panel opened inward. Beyond it was a short passage descending 3 steps behind the study fireplace. At the bottom stood another door, this one fitted into the dark wall paneling beside a cabinet of maps. From the study, it would have looked like part of the woodwork. Kramer said something unsuitable for the Ashford portraits. We entered the study through the concealed door. The fireplace stood 5 feet away. The desk was less than 15. Whoever came through the corridor could approach Charles Ashford from behind. Fire, retreat. Hand leave the ordinary door locked. James stared at the hidden panel. Then the study was never locked. It was locked, I said. Just not against everyone. Kramer examined the concealed latch from inside. No key needed. Only knowledge. He turned toward James. Who knew? James shook his head. I did not. Your father. I do not know. Your uncle. He must have. Richard Vale? I have never heard him mention it. That was not my question. James's face tightened. Kramer began listing the household one by one, asking whether each might have known the old layout. James answered uncertainly. Mrs. Bell had managed the house for 20 years. Edgar had served there for 41. Stephen and Charles had grown up in the manor. Richard Vale had visited regularly since youth. Lucy and James had played in every room as children. A secret known to nobody was becoming crowded. I studied the hidden door. The lower edge carried several fresh scratches. As though it had dragged against grit, a thin smear of dark oil marked the hinge. Someone had recently made sure the panel moved quietly. On the floor behind the fireplace lay a short black thread. I picked it up with a handkerchief. Kramer said, "From clothing?" "Could be. Dinner jacket, servant's coat, curtain cord, or a black cat with access to tools. There are no cats." That narrows it. He bagged the thread. We returned to the library. Miles had not moved. Mrs. Bell stood near the door with Lucy Ashford and Richard Vale behind her. Stephen had joined them, his face hard with impatience. Kramer addressed Miles. "The corridor connects directly to the study." Miles inclined his head. "It once did. It still does. I was unaware of that. You knew the library entrance. Yep, you knew the gallery. Yes, you owned spectacles specially, fitted for distance viewing. Miles's calm slipped for the first time. Stephen Ashford saw it and stepped forward. He watched Charles. Miles looked at him. Stephen continued. "That is what the old spy was doing. Watching us from inside the walls," Mrs. Bell said sharply. "Mr. Stephen." "No, let him answer. He claims he saw me through a courtyard window." Yet he had a private gallery with a perfect view of the study. Kramer said, "That is exactly what he is going to answer." Miles removed his spectacles. "I entered the gallery on occasion." "When?" "At night." "How often?" "Perhaps once or twice a month." "Why?" "To inspect the old woodwork for damp." Stephen laughed. Kramer did not. "You inspected damp wearing distance spectacles?" Miles polished the lenses. "The gallery is dim. Those spectacles are not for dimness. They are for distance. I may have worn whichever pair was available. They were made 4 months ago for low-light observation across the grounds." That stopped him. Kramer leaned closer. "The optician had records." Miles replaced the spectacles. "Carefully, I see." "No, Mr. Miles, that is the problem. You see very well. I could have applauded Kramer, but it would have spoiled him," he continued. "Were you in the gallery when Charles Ashford was shot?" "No." The answer was firm. Kramer's face hardened. "Then explain the fresh tracks, the dust on your polishing cloth, and the mark left by a spectacle case on the ledge." "I cannot." "That answer is losing value." Richard Vale spoke from the doorway. "Perhaps Edgar is protecting someone." He was in his late 50s, spare and carefully dressed, with a smooth voice and a face that had practiced neutrality for years. Kramer turned to him. "Who?" Vale glanced at Stephen. "I have no idea." "Then keep your suggestions until they grow bones." Vale accepted that with a faint smile. "I telephoned Wolfe from the study while Kramer began separating the family. 4 fresh interviews." Fritz answered and put Wolfe on report. Wolfe said, "I described the corridor, the gallery, the concealed panel behind the fireplace, the fresh scratches, the oiled hinge, the black thread, and Miles's denial. When I finished, Wolfe asked, 'Could a man enter the study through the concealed door without being seen from the courtyard?' Yes. Could he leave the same way? Yes. Could he lock the ordinary study door before the murder? Easily. Charles may have locked it himself. Could the concealed panel be closed from the corridor? Yes, sir. Then the locked room is nonsense." Kramer used a stronger word. "Mr. Kramer often compensates for weak vocabulary with force." I sat on the edge of the desk. Miles admits using the gallery, supposedly to inspect damp. Pfui. He denies being there during the murder. Of course. Why, of course? Because admitting the gallery destroys his courtyard statement. He might admit the lie and claim he still saw Stephen. He cannot. Why not? There was a pause long enough for Wolfe to open a bottle of beer. I heard the cap drop into the wastebasket. Archie, consider the sequence. Mr. Miles says he heard the shot from the courtyard, looked through the window, saw Stephen Ashford with the revolver, then watched him close the curtains. Yes. If he actually watched from the gallery, what becomes of the tray? A prop? The broken wine bottle? A reason to explain why he crossed outside. The exact time? Planned. And the spectacles? Necessary to support the story that he could see across the courtyard. No. The distance spectacles were obtained months ago. They were not purchased to support a lie invented last night. That was true, and I did not like missing it. I said, then he had been using them in the gallery before the murder. Precisely. To watch Charles. Or someone meeting Charles, which gives him knowledge he is. Hiding? Yes, I glanced toward the concealed panel. You think he witnessed more than the shooting? I think the gallery was reopened before the murder, maintained for use, and concealed from the household. Mr. Miles's lie was prepared in haste, but the means by which he obtained the truth had existed for months. The secret viewpoint, not merely a viewpoint, a habit. I considered the scratches and oil. Someone used the corridor regularly. Find out who had access to the library when the house was quiet. Also determine whether Charles Ashford knew he was being observed. How? Search the study properly. The police already did. Then search it improperly. He hung up. I went back through the hidden door and stood behind the fireplace, looking toward Charles Ashford's desk. From the gallery, Edgar could have watched the study without being noticed. From the corridor, someone could have entered and killed Charles without touching the locked door or windows. That explained the impossible room and the impossible view. It did not explain why Edgar had invented the courtyard, why he had ordered special lenses months earlier, or what he had seen before the night of the murder. I examined the desk again. The drawers had been searched by Kramer's men. The papers were marked and stacked. The blotter had been lifted. The wastebasket had been emptied. Then I noticed the fireplace screen. One brass foot sat slightly crooked. Beneath it, the carpet showed a pale line where the screen had recently been shifted. I moved it aside. Behind the right leg, pressed between the stone hearth and the paneling, was a small piece of torn paper. Only 6 words remained. Meet me in the gallery. Bring the ledger. There was no signature. I put it in an envelope and looked toward the carved screen above. The hidden corridor had not merely allowed someone to witness the murder. It had been used to arrange the meeting that led to it. Chapter 5. The different lenses, the paper I found behind the fireplace screen was on Wolfe's desk, Friday morning, along with 2 pairs of spectacles and Inspector Kramer, whose expression suggested that one of the 3 had personally insulted him. I was at my desk in the office on West 35th Street. Wolfe sat behind his desk with his eyes closed, leaning back in the oversized chair built to support both his body and his opinion of himself. He had returned from the plant rooms at 11, spent 6 minutes objecting to a draft that did not exist, and was now listening to Archie's report. Kramer dropped the spectacles on my desk. They are evidence, he said. So is your cigar, I told him. It proves somebody has been burning rope. He ignored me and pointed at the torn note Archie had placed inside a transparent envelope. Meet me in the gallery. Bring the ledger. That was hidden beside the fireplace. The concealed passage connects the library to the study. Miles knew about it and lied. I can arrest him now. Wolfe opened his eyes. For what? For obstructing an investigation. That would be unwise. Kramer stared at him. He gave a false statement. Possibly. Possibly? He claimed he saw Stephen Ashford through a courtyard window. Goodwin proved that view was impossible. Miles used the hidden gallery. Almost certainly. And he lied about the glasses. Yes. Then why shouldn't I take him? Because a liar is not necessarily a murderer, and a premature arrest often teaches the guilty person caution. Kramer planted both hands on Wolfe's desk. What do the spectacles prove? Wolfe looked at them without touching them. That depends upon the lenses. We already know the second pair is for distance. Mr. Finch provided measurements made from his records, not a full examination of the lenses as they exist today. Archie looked at me. You think they were altered again? I think objects should be examined before they are trusted. Kramer straightened. I had them checked. By whom? A police technician. A technician is not necessarily an optician. He said the prescriptions were different. That is not enough. Kramer's jaw moved. He wanted to argue, but Wolfe had already pressed the button to summon Fritz. When Fritz entered, Wolfe said, Please telephone Dr. Nathan Cole and ask whether he can come at once. Kramer frowned. Who is Nathan Cole? An optical specialist. I have specialists. You have employees. That nearly ended the meeting, but Kramer remained. His need for an answer was stronger than his desire to leave dramatically. Dr. Nathan Cole arrived 40 minutes later, carrying a black case. He was short, broad across the shoulders, and wore thick square spectacles of his own. Wolfe had once consulted him regarding a witness who claimed to recognize a taxi number in fog, and Cole had explained vision with such precision that Wolfe had forgiven him for being thin. After introductions, Cole sat at Archie's desk and opened his equipment. These belong to the same man? He asked. Yes, Wolfe said. Edgar Miles, age 72. Cole examined the everyday pair first. He measured the lenses, inspected the rims, and made several notes. This is a moderate correction for far-sightedness with astigmatism, he said. The lower portion assists reading. The upper portion is suitable for ordinary movement indoors. Could the wearer identify a face 60 feet away at night? Wolfe asked. Not reliably. He might recognize height, shape, clothing, or a familiar walk. Facial detail would be poor. Cole picked up the second pair. The frames looked almost identical. Both were made of narrow steel, both had oval lenses, and both had been adjusted to rest at the same angle. To anyone glancing at Edgar Miles, the change from one pair to the other would have been invisible. Cole placed them beneath his instrument. His eyebrows rose. These are unusual, Kramer said. How? The distance correction is strong but very carefully balanced. There is also a low-light coating designed to reduce glare and improve contrast. Could they identify a man across a courtyard? Archie asked. Under favorable conditions, yes. Through old glass? That would depend on distortion. Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin could not distinguish faces during a reconstruction. Cole turned toward him. Mr. Goodwin's eyes are not Mr. Miles's. A prescription corrects one person's limitations. And not another's, Archie nodded. Miles said the same thing. He was right. Kramer looked pleased for the first time that morning. Then Miles could have seen Stephen from the courtyard. Cole held up one finger. I did not say that. I said the lenses could sharpen distance. They cannot remove reflections, straighten warped glass, move a curtain, or create light where none exists. Kramer's pleasure disappeared. Cole returned to the spectacles. There is another difference. Wolfe's chin lowered slightly. What? The optical centers are positioned higher than usual, Archie said. Meaning? The lenses were designed for a wearer who expected to look straight ahead or slightly downward at a distant object, not down at the ground while walking. Kramer frowned. I don't follow. Cole put on the distance pair and looked across the office. They are excellent for watching from a fixed position. A balcony, observation post, theater box, elevated window, or gallery. They would be awkward for crossing uneven ground because nearby objects would blur. Archie leaned back. So they were not made for walking across a courtyard? Not primarily, Wolfe asked. Could the wearer switch between the pairs quickly? Certainly. The frames are nearly identical and adjusted to the same bridge width. He could remove one pair and replace it with the other without attracting attention. Would anyone watching him notice? Only if they were looking specifically at the lenses. Kramer glanced at Archie. The servant said he always wore the same pair. They saw the same frame, Archie said. Not the same lenses, Cole nodded. That is likely. Wolfe closed his eyes again. For nearly a minute nobody spoke. A taxi sounded its horn outside. Somewhere above us, the humidifier in the plant rooms clicked into operation. Then Wolfe said, the second pair was not a spare. Kramer snorted. We know that. No, you know it had a different prescription. That is not the same thing. Wolfe opened his eyes and looked directly at the spectacles. A spare object exists in case the original fails. It performs the same function. These spectacles performed an entirely different function. Mr. Miles possessed one pair for his ordinary duties and another for secret observation, Archie said. A second way of seeing the world. Yes, Kramer picked up the distance pair, so he stood in the gallery and watched Charles Ashford. Frequently, I suspect. Why? That remains to be discovered. Kramer turned toward Cole. Could those lenses help someone read papers on a desk from 15 feet away? If the papers were large enough and well lit, perhaps headings or bold figures, could they identify who signed a document? Not the signature itself unless the writing was unusually large. Wolfe said, could they distinguish whether a man held a revolver in his right or left hand? Easily at 15 feet. Could they observe a person falling in profile? Yes. Could they see someone closing curtains? Of course. Every detail in Edgar's statement had been visible from the hidden gallery. None had been reliably visible from the courtyard. Kramer returned the spectacles to the desk. He was there. Yes, Wolfe said. And if he was there, he may have used the corridor to enter the study. Possible. He may have killed Charles. Possible. He had $50,000 coming under the new will. Possible motive. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Do you enjoy saying possible? I enjoy accuracy. Archie handed Wolfe the note from the fireplace. What about the ledger? Wolfe examined the 6 surviving words. Meet me in the gallery. Bring the ledger, Kramer said. Charles wrote it to Miles. Perhaps. Who else knew about the gallery? More people than admit it. Stephen grew up in the house. Richard Vale visited for years. Mrs. Bell managed the place. James and Lucy played there as children. Exactly. So the note could have been written by anyone, not anyone. Someone who knew of the passage, knew of a ledger, and expected the recipient to understand both without explanation. Archie said, the ledger may contain the forged investment records Charles threatened to expose. An attractive inference, Kramer said. Then Stephen had the strongest motive. Too strong, Wolfe replied. Kramer stared at him. What does that mean? It means the evidence against Stephen Ashford is being presented with enthusiasm. A public quarrel, a threat, fingerprints on the weapon, a servant's eyewitness statement, a financial scandal. Evidence that arrives in a procession deserves inspection. Kramer put the cigar between his teeth. You think he was framed? I think someone intended him to be suspected. By persuading Miles to lie? Not necessarily. Mr. Miles may have formed his own purpose. Archie said protecting someone, or protecting the passage, or the ledger, or his own habit of observation. Kramer paced to the bookshelves. He sees the murder from the gallery. He knows the killer. Instead of naming the killer honestly, he invents a courtyard story and names Stephen. Why? That, Wolfe said, is the central question. The telephone rang. I answered. It was James Ashford calling from Ravenwood Manor. His voice was tight. Mr. Goodwin, something has happened. What? Edgar Miles has disappeared. Kramer heard it from across the room. I said, when? Mrs. Bell went to his room 20 minutes ago. His clothes are there, but he is gone. Car missing? No. Coat? His heavy coat is still hanging in the servants' hall. Has anyone searched the grounds? Yes, the corridor. A pause. The police detective at the library door says no one entered. I looked at Kramer. Stay where you are, I told James. We're coming, Wolfe said. No. I covered the mouthpiece. No what? You and Mr. Kramer may go. I will remain. Kramer was already moving toward the door. I told James we would arrive soon and hung up. Wolfe pointed to the 2 pairs of spectacles. Leave them. Kramer stopped. They are police. Evidence. They are safer here. Why? Because Mr. Miles has disappeared without his outdoor coat. Archie understood first. He did not leave the house. Probably not. The hidden corridor? Perhaps. Kramer reached for the spectacles. Wolfe's voice sharpened. Take the everyday pair if you insist. Leave the distance lenses. Kramer looked at him. Why? Because if Mr. Miles is hiding inside Ravenwood Manor, he may return for them. Kramer hesitated, then pushed both pairs toward Archie. Lock them up. I placed them in the office safe. As Kramer and I headed for the door, Wolfe called after us. Archie, I turned. Search the gallery ledge where Mr. Miles watched the study. Dr. Cole has supplied a useful fact. Which one? The lenses were designed for a fixed viewpoint angled slightly downward. I waited. Wolfe leaned back. A man who repeatedly observes from the same position leaves more than footprints. Determine exactly what Mr. Miles had been watching. On the drive to Ravenwood, Kramer said very little. The rain had begun again, thin and steady, and the headlights caught it like wires stretched across the road. I thought about Edgar Miles switching spectacles in the privacy of his pantry. The ordinary pair allowed him to read menus, polish silver, and recognize guests approaching a table. The second pair allowed him to stand in a dark gallery and watch the study below. For months, nobody had noticed the change because the frames looked the same. That had been the trick. Edgar Miles had lived 2 lives behind 2 nearly identical pieces of glass. In one, he was the perfect servant who saw only what duty required. In the other, he watched Charles Ashford through the walls of Ravenwood Manor. Now the butler was missing, and the spectacles he used for that hidden life were locked in Wolfe's safe. The question was no longer whether Edgar had seen the murder. The question was what else he had seen before it. Chapter 6. The Clock. That lead by the time Inspector Kramer and I reached Ravenwood Manor, Edgar Miles had been found. He had not fled, been kidnapped, or fallen into a well. He was sitting in a disused linen room inside the west wing, with the door locked and a folded sheet pressed against a cut on his forehead. According to Edgar, someone had struck him from behind while he was examining the hidden corridor. According to Kramer, that story needed exercise before it could stand upright. The county doctor found no serious injury. Edgar had a bruise above his right ear, and enough dignity left to object when 2 detectives searched his pockets. Who attacked you? Kramer demanded. I did not see the person. Did you hear anything? A movement behind me. Man or woman? I cannot say. What were you doing in the corridor? Edgar hesitated. Kramer leaned closer. Try the truth. It will be a new experience. I intended to examine the gallery. Why? To determine whether anything had been disturbed. Something had. Yes, what? Edgar looked at me instead of Kramer. The ledge beneath the observation screen, I said, what was on it? A small notebook. Whose? Mr. Charles Ashford's. Kramer's cigar tilted upward. What was in the notebook? I do not know. It had disappeared. You expect us to believe you watched Charles Ashford for months but never opened a notebook he left within reach. I did not say he left it there. Then how did it get there? Edgar closed his eyes briefly. I placed it there. Kramer took the cigar from his mouth. Where did you get it? From the study on the morning before Mr. Ashford died, that brought the room to attention. Edgar explained that Charles had summoned him privately and handed him a small black notebook. He had ordered Edgar to hide it in the gallery until instructed otherwise. Edgar had obeyed without reading it. Why the gallery? I asked. Mr. Charles believed no one else knew the passage remained open. He was wrong, yes. Was that notebook the ledger mentioned in the torn note? I do not know, Kramer said. You know more than you are telling. That may be true. Kramer nearly swallowed the cigar. Before he could demonstrate the persuasive value of shouting, the grandfather clock in the entrance hall began to chime. One deep note rolled through the house, followed by another and another. I counted 10. I looked at my wristwatch. It was 7 minutes before 10. Kramer noticed me looking. What? The clock. What about it? It just struck 10. So, it is 9:53. He checked his own watch. The old clock stood against the hall wall beneath the staircase, a tall walnut case with a brass face and a moon dial. Its pendulum moved slowly behind the glass. Mrs. Bell entered from the dining room. That clock has never kept proper time, she said. How improper? I asked. A few minutes. Fast or slow? Fast, usually. Was it fast last night? She frowned. I suppose so. Kramer said. The shot was at 9:27. That was the time recorded in Edgar Miles's original statement and repeated in every police report. Yet the more I thought about it, the less solid it became. How did you establish 9:27? I asked. Kramer looked irritated. 8 witnesses checked clocks. Before or after the shot? After. Which clocks? The hall clock, the drawing room mantel clock, wristwatches. Did anyone actually look at a watch when the gun fired? He did not answer immediately. I found James Ashford in the drawing room with his sister Lucy, their mother Helen, Richard Vale and Stephen. They had occupied the same room on the night of the murder, and they had repeated their account often enough to make it sound rehearsed even if it was true. I stood beside the card table. When did you hear the shot? James answered first. At 9:27. How do you know? The hall clock had just chimed the quarter hour. I looked at him. The quarter hour? Yes, not 9:27? He hesitated. Lucy said, the clock chimed 9:15. We checked the time afterward. Which time? My wristwatch showed 9:27. Did you hear the chime before the shot or after it? Just before, Stephen said impatiently. What difference does it make? Possibly 12 minutes. Helen Ashford, Stephen's wife, put down her teacup. The hall clock's quarter chime has been wrong for months. It sometimes chimes late. There it was. A house full of wealthy people had agreed on an exact time by joining 2 unreliable facts. A clock that chimed the quarter incorrectly, and watches consulted only after confusion began. I questioned them separately. James remembered the quarter chime, then the shot. Then Edgar shouting from the hall. Lucy remembered leaving the card table to answer the telephone shortly after the chime. Helen remembered Stephen standing near the fireplace when the shot sounded, but admitted she had been looking at her cards. James remembered Richard. Vale crossing to the drinks table. Richard remembered. James opening the drawing room door. Stephen claimed that he had remained in the drawing room throughout. Though no witness had watched him continuously, every account was tied to the lying clock. I found Mrs. Bell and asked who wound it. Edgar usually does. When? Every Monday morning. Did anyone touch it yesterday? She thought. A clock repairman came during the afternoon. Name? No repairman was listed in the visitor book, Edgar said from the doorway. His forehead had been bandaged. He looked tired but attentive. Mrs. Bell turned to him. I saw a man beside the clock at about 4. He had a tool case. Did you speak to him? He said Mr. Charles had sent for him. Did Charles mention repairs? No. Kramer ordered the county men to locate every clock repair business within 20 miles. I examined the grandfather clock while he telephoned headquarters. The front glass was unlocked. Inside, the brass pendulum swung beneath 3 heavy weights. The clock face showed 10:17, 24 minutes ahead of my wristwatch. I opened the lower case. Fresh scratches marked the brass nut beneath the pendulum. Someone had adjusted it recently. More important, the minute hand could be moved. Independently if a small retaining pin behind the face was released, a dark smear marked the pin. Machine oil, the same kind of oil found on the concealed corridor hinge. Kramer. Vent beside me. Can you prove it was altered? An expert can. He sent for one. The expert arrived an hour later. His name was Samuel Briggs, and he looked old enough to remember when the clock had been fashionable. He removed the face, inspected the movement, and announced that someone had advanced it deliberately. How much? Kramer asked. 3 minutes yesterday, perhaps more since. The pendulum adjustment has caused it to gain steadily. Could it have been exactly 3 minutes fast at 9 last night? Yes, what about the quarter chime? Briggs examined a separate wheel. This lever has been bent. The quarter chime releases 12 minutes late, I said. So when the household heard the chime for 9:15, the correct time was 9:27, approximately. That preserved the recorded time of the shot, but it destroyed the reasoning behind it. The witnesses had not known the time independently. They had believed it because the clock told them what they expected to hear. Worse, the clock itself had been tampered with in 2 different ways. Kramer gathered everyone in the drawing room. The hall clock was deliberately altered yesterday afternoon, he announced. A man pretending to be a repairman was seen beside it. The visitor book contains no record of him. Stephen said, "Then find him." "We intend to," Richard Vale asked. "What purpose could changing a clock by 3 minutes serve?" I answered, 3 minutes is enough to create an alibi if everybody agrees on where everybody else was. The drawing room became quiet. I placed a sheet of paper on the card table and drew a rough timeline at what the hall clock displayed as 9:24. Lucy left to answer the telephone. At the displayed time of 9:25, Richard Vale went to the drinks table near the curtained alcove. At 9:26, James opened the door after hearing silver fall somewhere in the corridor. At 9:27, the false quarter chime sounded, followed almost immediately by the gunshot. But if the main clock was 3 minutes fast, every movement had occurred 3 minutes earlier than the witnesses believed. The polished alibis covered the wrong interval. Kramer pointed at the timeline. Between the real 9:21 and 9:24, no one can place Stephen continuously, Helen Ashford protested. He was in the room. You believe he was? Stephen stood. This is absurd. I said it also creates gaps for James, Lucy, Richard, and Stephen. The clock did not clear anyone. It confused everyone. Kramer turned toward Edgar. Did you know the clock had been altered? No, you wound it. Not since Monday. Did Charles ask you to change it? No. Did you see the false repairman? Yes. I telephoned Wolfe from the library and gave him the new facts. He listened without interruption. The quarter chime was 12 minutes late, I concluded. That is why the witnesses connected 9:15 with the gunshot at 9:27. The displayed time was also 3 minutes fast. Their alibis were built around a clock no one had checked. And the mechanism bore oil matching that used on the hidden panel. Yes, interesting. You say that as though somebody had brought you a new orchid. The clock and the spectacles perform the same. Service? One tells time and the other improves vision. No, both. Create confidence, I waited. Wolfe continued. Mr. Miles's distance lenses allowed him to describe details that persuaded everyone he had seen the murder from the courtyard. The altered clock gave every witness a precise time they had not independently observed. In both cases, an instrument replaced judgment, so the same person planned both deceptions. Possibly, at minimum, the murderer understood that people trust mechanisms more readily than memory. The lenses were ordered months ago. The clock was altered yesterday. Then the murder plan may have used an existing secret, Edgar's habit of watching from the gallery. Yes, someone knew he watched the study, knew he possessed special lenses, and expected him to witness the crime. That was a new angle, and it had teeth. You think Edgar was deliberately given a view? I think the murderer may have counted on him. To accuse Stephen? Or to repeat exactly what he believed he saw. But Edgar lied about the courtyard on his own. Perhaps. Yet a deception may include another man's predictable lie. I looked through the library doorway toward the hall clock. So the killer manipulated both what Edgar saw and when everyone thought it happened. Indeed. What do I do next? Determine who arranged the false telephone call that removed Lucy Ashford from the card table. Find the supposed clock repairman and inspect the drinks alcove. Why the alcove? Because Mr. Vale crossed to it during the period everyone remembers least accurately. I returned to the drawing room. The family had begun arguing over 3 minutes as if they were shares in a company. Kramer stood beside the card table, rewriting his timeline. The grandfather clock chimed again in the hall. Nobody looked reassured by it now. The distant spectacles had made Edgar certain of a face he should not have seen. The clock had made 7 witnesses, certain of a time none of them had actually observed. The killer had not merely hidden behind darkness and locked doors. He had arranged for everyone in Ravenwood manner to see too clearly, remember too precisely, and be wrong with complete confidence. Chapter 7. The Ledger in the Wall. The drinks alcove gave us nothing except 3 empty bottles, 6 clean glasses, and proof that rich people can make a small room uncomfortable with expensive furniture. The false telephone call to Lucy Ashford had come from an extension in the West Wing. That narrowed the caller to anyone inside Ravenwood Manor, which narrowed nothing. The supposed clock repairman had vanished as completely as Sarah Kent, though one garage attendant remembered a dark car leaving the estate shortly before 5. By midnight, Kramer was tired, the family was hostile, and I was back inside the hidden corridor with a flashlight. Wolfe had told me to search the study improperly. Since proper searching had already involved fingerprints, measurements, photographs, and 3 trained detectives, I decided improper searching meant looking where respectable policemen disliked bending. The passage behind the fireplace was narrow, dusty, and cold. Fresh marks crossed the floor where several of us had walked since discovering it, but older signs remained near the walls. A faint groove ran along the stones where something heavy had repeatedly been dragged. Aside, I followed it to a section halfway between the gallery and the study door. One stone projected less than half an inch beyond the others. I pressed it. Nothing happened. Pulled. The stone shifted. Kramer, standing behind me, said, "Don't break the house. It has survived the Ashfords. It can survive me." I worked my fingers along the edges and drew the stone out. Behind it was a cavity about 18 inches deep. Inside lay a package wrapped in oilcloth. Kramer reached over my shoulder. I moved it away. I found it. You work for me when evidence is involved. That arrangement has never been approved. He took the package anyway. Inside the oilcloth was a thick, black ledger secured with a cracked leather strap. The cover carried no title. The first page bore only a date from 14 years earlier, and the initials CA and SA Kramer looked at me, Charles and Stephen Ashford, possibly. Charles and St. Anthony. There are no saints in this house. We carried the ledger into the library and spread it across a table. At first it seemed to be a record of investments. Columns listed property purchases, shipping contracts, construction loans, and private companies with names bland enough to encourage sleep. Then the numbers began repeating in ways numbers should not. A parcel in Queens had been sold 3 times through companies sharing the same address. A warehouse near the river had changed owners on paper while remaining under Ashford control. Payments had moved through holding firms, disappeared, and returned as loans. Kramer turned pages faster. This is fraud. It is certainly untidy, so it is millions. That makes it important untidiness. Several entries carried Charles Ashford's initials. Others carried Stephen's. A few were marked RV, which might have belonged to Richard Vale. The later pages contained handwritten notes in Charles's sharp script. Stephen refuses further transfers. Vale says records must be destroyed. Original deeds remain in the west wall. Near the back, one page had been torn out. Kramer swore. The final surviving entry had been made 6 days before the murder board disclosure Friday. Copies secured. EM instructed. I tapped the initials, Edgar. Miles. Kramer closed the book. He hid it, probably, and lied to protect it. Probably. I'm going to enjoy hearing Wolfe say that. You won't. He'll say it with better pronunciation. Sent for Edgar. He entered the library wearing his ordinary spectacles. The bandage above his ear had been replaced, and his face looked pale under the lamps. When he saw the ledger, he stopped. Kramer pointed to the chair opposite us. Sit. I prefer to stand. You have preferred many things. Today, Edgar sat. Kramer placed one hand on the ledger. You hid this in the corridor. Yes. The direct answer surprised both of us. When? 6 days ago. On Charles Ashford's instructions? Yes. Why? Mr. Charles believed someone was searching his study. Who? He did not say. Did you read the ledger? No. Kramer gave him a stare. You expect me to believe you hid evidence of financial fraud and never opened it? I was instructed not to. You watched your employer from inside a wall, lied about a murder, and hid financial records, but you draw the line at opening a book. Edgar's mouth tightened. I served Mr. Charles. Service sometimes requires obedience without approval. I said, You have known about the passage for decades. Yes, you used it to hide papers before, occasionally, for Charles. For his father first and later for him. What kind of papers? Private agreements, family letters, documents connected to business disputes. Documents the family was not supposed to know about. Yes, Kramer leaned closer. Then why did you lie about being in the gallery during the murder? Edgar looked at the ledger. Because admitting where I stood would have exposed the passage. That answer is 6 chapters late, I said. He ignored me. Kramer said, A man was dead. I know. You named Stephen Ashford. I saw a man who appeared to be Mr. Stephen. Appeared. It was the first time Edgar had weakened the identification. Kramer heard it too. You told us you saw his face clearly. I believed I did. From the gallery. Yes, not the courtyard? No. The word came quietly. Kramer sat back. So your entire statement was false. The location was false. The location was the statement. Edgar removed his spectacles and cleaned them. For though they were already clean, if I had admitted using the gallery, the police would have searched the corridor. They would have found the ledger. Mr. Charles had ordered me to protect it until the board meeting. He was dead. Kramer said. His instructions were not. That was Edgar Miles in one sentence. I asked, why invent the courtyard? The broken wine bottle provided a reason for me to cross outside. I believed a false location would preserve the truth of what I had seen while protecting the papers. You also lied about which spectacles you wore. Yes. Why? The distance pair would have suggested I had prepared to watch the study. You had? Edgar lowered his eyes. For several months. On Charles's orders? Not always, that mattered. Kramer said, Explain. Edgar looked toward the hidden bookcase. Mr. Charles had become secretive. Men came to the study late at night. Arguments were held behind locked doors. Papers disappeared from his desk. I watched because I believed someone intended to harm him. Who visited him? Mr. Stephen, Mr. Vale, Mrs. Bell on occasion. Once Miss Lucy. Anyone else? Edgar hesitated. Sarah Kent. The missing maid had finally entered the center of the case. Kramer's voice sharpened. What business did Sarah have with Charles? I do not know. They met twice in the study after midnight. Did she carry papers? The second time, yes. What kind? A long envelope. Did Charles give it to her? She gave it to him. When? 3 nights before his death. I opened the ledger near the final entries. Could the envelope have contained the missing page? I could not see clearly enough. That was ironic enough to deserve framing. Kramer asked, What exactly did you see on the night of the murder? Edgar's hands rested flat on his knees. I entered the gallery shortly before the shot. Mr. Charles was standing beside the desk. Another man came through the concealed door behind the fireplace. Stephen. He had Mr. Stephen's height and dinner jacket. Face? I saw it briefly. Was it Stephen? Edgar's eyes moved toward the ledger. I believed so. Kramer struck the table with his palm. Believed? The man turned away. The light was behind him. I saw the side of his face for only an instant. Yet you swore it was Stephen. I was certain then. What changed? The clock. Kramer and I looked at each other. Edgar continued. When I heard the hall chime, I believed the time was 9:15. I knew Mr. Stephen had left the drawing room shortly before that. Kramer said, No witness admits he left. I saw him in the hall. When? Before I entered the gallery. Why did you conceal that? Because I thought it confirmed what I later saw. But the clock was wrong, I said. Yes, the altered time had shaped Edgar's certainty, just as the special lenses had shaped his view. He had seen a figure resembling Stephen and fitted it into a false sequence. I turned the ledger toward him. What does this have to do with the passage? Everything, Edgar said. He placed one finger on the initials in the early pages. Mr. Charles and Mr. Stephen began these investments together. Later, Mr. Charles transferred properties without his brother's knowledge and used Mr. Stephen's signature on several documents. When Mr. Stephen discovered it, he demanded the records be corrected. Kramer frowned. The ledger makes Stephen look guilty because Mr. Charles intended it to. That changed the room. Edgar continued. Some entries are genuine. Others were added later. Mr. Charles planned to accuse his brother publicly and force him out of the company. Why? I asked. Control. Then Stephen had a motive to kill him. Yes. But Charles also had enemies among the other partners. Yes. Especially Richard Vale. Edgar said nothing, which was answer enough. The telephone rang in the hall. A detective answered, then called for Kramer. He returned 2 minutes later. They found Sarah Kent. Where? I asked. At a boarding house in White Plains. She had a train ticket for Chicago and $5,000 in cash. Who paid her? She won't say. Kramer picked up the ledger. Maybe this will improve her memory. After he left, I telephoned Wolfe. I reported the ledger, the forged transfers, the missing page, Edgar's admission, and Sarah's secret meetings with Charles. When I finished, Wolfe said, Mr. Miles feared the passage would expose the ledger. Yes, and his false testimony protected both. Yes. But by naming Stephen Ashford, he strengthened the accusation Charles had prepared. Edgar believed he saw Stephen. Belief is not sight. He now admits the face was unclear. Good. Good? It is useful when certainty begins to decay. What matters is what remains after it does. I looked at the open wall where the ledger had been hidden. What remains? A man entered the study through the passage. Mr. Miles saw his shape, clothing, and movement. The altered clock persuaded him that the man must be Stephen. The distance lenses persuaded him that his glimpse was clearer than it was. So, the killer used Edgar's habits against him, yes, and the ledger supplied the motive. It supplied several motives. That was Wolfe. Give him one fraudulent ledger. And he wanted at least 3 murderers out of it. Before hanging up, he said, Archie, find the missing page. You make it sound easy. It is essential. Therefore, difficulty is irrelevant. The ledger had explained why Charles Ashford died, why Edgar lied, and why someone had reopened the hidden corridor. But one page had been removed before the book was hidden. Whatever had been written there was important enough to steal, important enough to kill for, and important enough to leave every other secret in the wall behind. Chapter 8. The spectacles disappear. The distant spectacles returned to Ravenwood Manor at 11 the next morning, because Inspector Kramer wanted Edgar Miles to identify them formally in the room where he had kept them. I brought them from Wolfe's safe in a sealed envelope, signed the evidence card, and handed them to Kramer in the butler's room. It was a narrow chamber on the 3rd floor, neat enough to look unoccupied. A black suit hung inside the wardrobe, shoes stood in a perfect row beneath it, and a silver-backed brush rested precisely in the center of the dressing table. Kramer broke the seal. These yours? He asked. Edgar stood beside the bed with a fresh bandage above his ear. Yes. The pair you used in the gallery? Yes. The pair with the distance lenses? Yes. Kramer put them on the dressing table. A police photographer took pictures of the spectacles, the brown leather case, and Edgar standing beside both. Then Kramer ordered a county detective named Burke to remain outside the room while he took Edgar downstairs for another statement. I said, "Why leave the evidence here?" "Because I want the room searched with everything in place. The spectacles have already been examined. The room hasn't? Then put them in your pocket," Kramer gave me a look. "You think somebody will steal them with a detective outside the door? In this house people travel through walls." He did not appreciate the reminder. Burke was told that no one entered without Kramer's permission. We went downstairs and spent 40 minutes in the library, while Edgar repeated his account of hiding the ledger and watching the murder. When Kramer finally returned to the 3rd floor, Burke was still outside the door. "Anyone enter?" Kramer asked. "No, sir." "Anyone come up the stairs?" Mrs. Bell passed at the far end of the hall. Nobody came near this room. Kramer opened the door. The spectacles were gone. The brown case remained open on the dressing table. The everyday spectacles were still on Edgar's face. The sealed evidence envelope lay beside the case, but the distance pair had disappeared. Kramer turned slowly toward Burke. "You were outside this door?" "Yes, sir." "The whole time?" "Yes." "You did not leave?" "No." "You did not sleep?" Burke's face reddened. "No, sir." Kramer entered the room and searched it personally. He opened drawers, removed clothing from the wardrobe, looked beneath the mattress, shook the pillows, examined the wastebasket, and inspected the narrow window. The window was closed and latched from inside. There was no fireplace, no second door, and no space behind the wardrobe large enough to hide a child, much less a thief. Kramer faced Edgar. "You took them before leaving?" "No." "They were on the table?" "Yes." "Then where are they?" "I do not know." That answer follows you everywhere. Edgar's expression remained controlled, but I saw fear behind it. Not fear of arrest, something more private. I examined the dressing table. The brown leather case had been moved slightly. Its outline remained in the dust, showing it had originally rested 2 inches nearer the mirror. A pale thread clung to the metal clasp. I picked it up with tweezers. It was coarse and grey. "Cleaning cloth," Edgar said when I showed it to him. "What kind?" "The household cloths used for silver and brass are softer." "That appears to be from the cellar supply." Kramer looked at him. "You can identify a rag by one thread?" "I have managed this house for 41 years. Then managed to find my evidence." I went to the door and looked down. The carpet in the hall was thick enough to hide footprints, but near the baseboard was a faint streak of black dust. It continued for several feet toward a linen cupboard. Burke said, "Nobody went near that cupboard. Did you watch the cupboard or the door?" "The door." That answers it. Inside the cupboard were folded sheets, towels, and blankets. At the back, behind the lower shelf, I found a square wooden panel with a narrow gap along one side. Kramer said a word Wolfe would not permit at the breakfast table. I pulled the panel open. A cramped shaft descended between the walls. It was not the main hidden corridor, but an old servant's chute, once used to send laundry from the upper floor to the cellar. A rope hung inside. The spectacles had not walked past Burke. They had gone downward. Kramer ordered men to cover every cellar exit. Then we descended by the ordinary stairs, which took longer but preserved our bones. The cellar beneath Ravenwood Manor was large enough to support a second household. It contained wine racks, storage rooms, a furnace chamber, shelves of preserved food, and 2 coal bins left from the years before the heating system had been converted. The laundry chute ended in a narrow room beside the furnace. On the floor beneath it lay a grey cleaning cloth. The spectacles were not inside. Kramer picked up the cloth. Someone dropped them down the chute, came here, removed them, and carried them away. "Or hid them nearby," I said. The cellar smelled of damp stone, coal dust, and old wood. The floor showed dozens of marks from servants, detectives, and workmen. A clean trail was impossible. I asked Mrs. Bell, who had entered the cellar that morning. The cook sent Mary Dale for preserves. Henry Bell inspected the furnace. Richard Vale came down looking for wine. Richard came himself. He said he wanted a particular bottle. What about James or Stephen? Not that I saw. Sarah Kent. She is still with the police. Kramer sent detectives into every room. I examined the cloth found beneath the chute. One corner carried a rusty red powder that did not resemble coal. I rubbed a little between my fingers. Brick dust. The hidden corridor behind the library had unfinished brick along its upper section. We had found similar dust on Edgar's polishing cloth and near the observation gallery. Someone who handled the spectacles had recently been inside that passage. I followed. A line of black smudges from the laundry room to the older coal storage area. 2 high wooden bins stood against the wall. One was nearly empty. The other contained several dozen burlap sacks filled with coal left for emergency use. The top sacks were clean. The 4th sack had been disturbed. I called Kramer. We moved the upper sacks aside. Beneath them, wrapped in another grey cleaning cloth, lay the distant spectacles in their brown leather case. Kramer lifted the bundle carefully. The cloth was marked with coal and the same reddish dust. "Why hide them here?" he asked. "To prevent them from being examined again. They have already been examined. Not for fingerprints." He looked at me. Dr. Cole had handled them in Wolfe's office. So had Kramer, Edgar, Finch, and I. Fingerprints might prove nothing unless one appeared where it should not, but the thief had not merely tried to keep a stranger's print from being found. The spectacles themselves connected Edgar to the gallery. Without them, his detailed testimony might still be argued as extraordinary eyesight or honest error. With them, the secret observation post became deliberate. Kramer ordered the cloth case and spectacles bagged separately. We returned upstairs and assembled the household in the library. James Ashford looked offended by the cellar search. Lucy looked frightened. Stephen looked tired. Richard Vale remained composed, unaware that Wolfe's attention had shifted away from him and towards Stephen. Mrs. Bell stood beside Edgar, while Mary Dale kept her eyes on the floor. Kramer placed the evidence bag on the table. These were thrown down the laundry chute and hidden beneath coal sacks. Whoever took them knew the upper passageways, knew the cellar, and knew the spectacles mattered. Richard Vale said, "Nearly everyone in this house knows where the cellar is." "Not everyone knew the laundry chute still opened," Mrs. Bell replied. Kramer looked at her. "Who did?" "The servants," Edgar said, "and members of the family who played there as children." Stephen gave him a cold look. "You seem eager to widen the list. I am stating a fact. I telephoned Wolfe from the study. He had finished lunch and was in a mood to tolerate information. I described the disappearance, the laundry chute, the coal sacks, and the brick dust on the cleaning cloth. Someone entered the hidden passage before taking the spectacles. I concluded, or carried a cloth already contaminated by it. Yes. Were the spectacles damaged? No. Then destruction was not the purpose. They could have smashed them or thrown them into the furnace. Exactly. They wanted them hidden, not destroyed. Indeed, I waited. Wolfe said, "People rarely hide an object unless it tells an inconvenient story. The story being that Edgar watched from the gallery. That is only the first sentence. What is the second? The person who concealed the spectacles feared not merely that Mr. Miles's location would be established, but that his position in the gallery would be measured. I looked toward the carved observation screen. Measured how? Angle, distance, and field of view. You think the exact position proves what he could or could not see? Yes. He saw the killer. He saw a figure dressed to resemble Stephen Ashford. But from his elevated position, he may also have seen something the murderer did not expect, such as the top of the killer's head, the direction from which he entered, an object carried beneath the jacket, a reflection invisible from floor level. I thought of Edgar's detailed statement. He had described the gun, Charles's fall, and the closing curtains. He had said little about what occurred immediately before the shot. Edgar is still holding something back. Certainly. Why? Because truth has consequences. And Mr. Miles has spent 41 years managing consequences. For the Ashford family. I lowered my voice. The cloth carried brick dust, then its owner. He used the corridor recently. The same person may have taken the missing ledger. Page. Likely. And attacked Edgar. Possibly. There. Was that word again? Before Wolfe hung up, he said, "Bring Mr. Miles to the brownstone tomorrow morning. Kramer won't like it. Mr. Kramer is not invited." I returned to the library, where Kramer was demanding that everyone account for the 40 minutes during which the spectacles vanished. Their answers were polished, overlapping and nearly useless. The distance lenses had already exposed Edgar's lie about the courtyard. Now their disappearance exposed something. Else someone inside Ravenwood Manor understood exactly how dangerous those lenses had become. The spectacles were not valuable because they helped an old butler see. They were valuable because they preserved the angle from which he had seen a murderer. Chapter 9. The Witness Who Saw Too Much Nero. Wolfe came to Ravenwood Manor at 4 in the afternoon, which proved the case had finally become more offensive to him than travel. He arrived in a hired sedan with Fritz beside him, a cushion behind his back, and an expression suggesting the road had been designed personally to annoy him. "I met them at the entrance. You survived," I said. "Barely." "Where is Mr. Kramer?" "In the drawing room, pretending this was his idea." "Good. Let him continue." The Ashford drawing room had been arranged for judgment. Stephen stood near the fireplace. James and Lucy occupied the sofa with their mother between them. Richard Vale sat alone by the windows. Mrs. Bell and Mary Dale remained near the door. Edgar Miles stood behind a straight-backed chair, wearing his everyday spectacles. Kramer paced near the card table. Wolfe lowered himself into the largest chair available and looked around. "I have not come to identify the murderer," he said. "Not yet. I have come to remove a lie that has obstructed the truth." Kramer scowled. "Then remove it." Wolfe turned to Edgar. "Mr. Miles, you stated that you crossed the courtyard at 9:27 carrying a tray. Heard a shot and saw Stephen. Ashford through the study window. Yes, that Statement was false. Edgar's face remained still. The location was false. The location governed everything you claimed to. See? Mr. Goodwin repeated your walk under the same conditions. Even with your distant spectacles, faces could not be distinguished through the old glass. Reflections concealed the desk, and the curtains reduced the view further. Stephen said, "Then Edgar framed me." "No," Wolfe replied. "He misled the police. That is not necessarily the same thing." Kramer folded his arms. Let him explain the difference. Wolfe ignored him. At approximately 9:12 by the true time, Mr. Miles entered the hidden passage from the library. He wore the distant spectacles, not his ordinary pair. He took his usual position behind the observation screen overlooking the study. Edgar lowered his eyes. Wolfe continued. Charles Ashford was already inside. The ordinary study door was locked. He expected a visitor through the concealed corridor behind the fireplace. Richard Vale shifted slightly. At 9:14, Wolfe said, "A man entered through that corridor. Mr. Miles saw Stephen Ashford." Every face turned toward Stephen. Stephen's voice was hard. "I entered the study." Yes, James stood. "You denied leaving the drawing room." "I denied killing Charles." Kramer stepped toward him. "Sit down." Stephen remained standing. Wolfe said, "You left the drawing room during the confusion caused by Lucy Ashford's false telephone call. The altered hall clock made the interval appear later than it was. You entered the study through the concealed corridor because Charles had summoned you with the note concerning the ledger." Stephen looked at Edgar. "You saw me?" "Yes," the butler said. "Then why lie?" Edgar did not answer. Wolfe answered for him. "Because the truth would have opened the wall." He indicated the library beyond the hall. The hidden corridor was not merely an architectural curiosity. For decades, it had served as the private archive of the Ashford family. Deeds, forged transfers, secret loans, concealed partnerships, and agreements involving people who were never told. Their names had been used were hidden there. Helen Ashford went. Pale Wolfe looked at her. Some family members benefited from those transactions without knowing their origin. Others signed documents they did not understand. Several would have faced scandal, investigation, and financial ruin had the corridor been searched immediately. Edgar spoke quietly. "Mr. Charles ordered me to protect the papers, even after his death." Kramer asked. "Yes." Kramer shook his head. "That his loyalty carried past stupidity." "It was duty," Edgar said. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "No, Mr. Miles, duty does not excuse false testimony in a murder inquiry, but it explains it." He turned to the others. "Mr. Miles saw Stephen Ashford enter through the concealed passage. He saw an argument. He saw Charles reach for the ledger. He saw Stephen seize the revolver from the desk." Stephen said, "I took it away from him." "Yes, and put it down." "Yes," Kramer snapped. "You handled the murder weapon and said nothing." Stephen faced him. "Charles threatened to shoot me. I took the gun, placed it on the desk, and left." "Through the corridor?" "Yes." "At what time?" "I do not know." The hall clock chimed shortly after I returned to the drawing room. Wolfe said, "The clock was wrong." That error convinced Mr. Miles that Stephen remained in the study until the shot. Edgar removed his spectacles and polished them. "I saw Mr. Stephen leave." The room froze. Kramer stared at him. "You never said that." "No." "Why?" "Because another person entered immediately afterward. That was the fact Wolfe had brought us there to force into daylight." Kramer said, "Who?" Edgar's hand stopped moving. I did not see the face. Stephen laughed without humor. "You saw mine clearly enough. I saw you before the curtains were partly drawn." The second man remained near the fireplace and kept his back toward the gallery. Wolfe nodded. "Mr. Miles saw too much, but not enough." He saw Stephen enter, handle the revolver, and leave. Then he saw another figure approach Charles. When the shot was fired, the second figure stood where Stephen had stood moments earlier. James said, "Then why accuse Stephen?"